Well, welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to the West Bank, where school children are taught to praise and honor those who attacked Israel and the Jewish people. And that is going on in Palestinian schools. And here's I guess the worst part. Your tax dollars are paying for it. And that's all thanks to the new administration. President Biden has decided to resume funding the Palestinian Authority and the UN Relief Works Agency, UNRWA.
Well, that's just one of the huge challenges Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be facing if he succeeds in forming a majority coalition government. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Faced with a nearly impossible scenario, Prime Minister Netanyahu is aggressively taking up the challenge.
I will make every effort to take Israel out from the circle of recurring elections and to establish a strong government for all citizens of Israel.
In order to gain the 61 seats, Netanyahu would need the backing of Naftali Bennett's Yamina party and either the Islamist Ram party or defectors from other parties. Danny Danon, chairman of World Likud, sees a potential two-stage process.
The first stage is to get a government, regardless of the number of support we have, just to get the votes to pass it in the parliament. The second stage will be to bring more parties and to make it a stronger coalition.
Meanwhile, Israel is objecting to President Biden's decision to resume funding to the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA, the UN body overseeing Palestinian refugees.
In conversations with the U.S. State Department, I have expressed my disappointment and objection to the decision to renew UNRWA's funding without first ensuring that certain reforms, including stopping the incitement and removing anti-Semitic content from its educational curriculum, are carried out.
David Bedin, whose organization monitors the UNRWA education system, says children are still taught to honor and appreciate those who attack Israel and its people.
How can you allocate funds to a school system which teaches the children to make war on a member state of the United Nations? There is no accountability procedure in UNRWA. This is an agency which has military training in the schools.
With the majority of its budget going to education, Bedin calls for UNRWA to be held responsible for what it teaches.
Donor nations could demand, number one, a disarming of the UNRWA camps. Number two, stopping military training in the camps. Number three, introducing concepts of peace education, of reconciliation with their Jewish neighbors, instead of saying the only solution for the Jewish neighbors is to make war on them.
Bedin maintains the priority should be investigating to understand what really goes on inside these camps, rather than just go with the flow and get excited about giving money to refugees. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, here's an underlying fact, and that there aren't any refugees anymore. We're talking about something that happened 73 years ago. In 1948, Israel declared that it was a nation. It's Independence Day for Israel. That was 73 years ago. The same day, the surrounding Arab nations declared war on the brand new state. And in that declaration, encouraged the Arabs to leave their homes. They didn't want them to be collateral damage in the war. And so they left. They never expected Israel to win, but Israel won. And now to say, well, there's an ongoing refugee crisis. Well, no, there's no refugee crisis. How can you possibly claim that in the fourth, fifth, sixth generation since 1948? So we need to come to the reality that this isn't a refugee problem. What it is an ideological problem, and what they're doing is teaching their children to wipe out Israel. That is the education that's happening in the Palestinian schools. They erect monuments to suicide bombers. They declare them to be heroes and martyrs for the faith. And their goal that they teach their children is we need to drive the Jews into the sea. That's why you haven't seen peace. That's why there's really no two-state solution because the Palestinians have no idea that they want to create a separate state. They want to wipe out Israel. That's their idea of peace. So why are we funding it? Why are we funding that kind of ideology? I applauded the Trump administration for recognizing the reality on the ground and saying this is not a good deal for the American taxpayer. To see these payments resumed, it's just continuing a fiction, and it's continuing to kick the can down the road. These refugee, quote, camps, close quote, should be closed. It should no longer be recognized as a refugee problem. And when you finally have the Palestinians say, we want to live at peace with Israel, well, now you can come to a peaceful solution. But until that time, until they stop training their children to kill Jews, you're never going to see peace. Well, in other news, a South Carolina doctor who was killed in a shooting attack is being remembered for his strong Christian faith. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN Newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, Dr. Robert Leslie was among the 5 people killed in the shootings Wednesday, along with 3 members of his family and a repairman. The doctor was known as a pillar of the community. He often wrote of his work and faith, once writing, "One day when I depart this body and find myself in the presence of the Lord, my time, however it will be measured, will be filled with the praises and the wonder of Jesus." The shooting investigation comes as President Biden announced executive action on gun control Thursday, but Republicans and gun rights supporters are questioning his agenda. The government apprehended nearly 19,000 migrant children on the southern border last month, the largest number ever. The surge of children and teenagers traveling without a parent doubled the number from February. Some 30% of the 172,000 migrants encountered at the border were making repeat attempts to cross. Conservatives and other critics have complained about liberal bias in major media for decades, and now they say it is on full display once again. Our Jennifer Wishon explains.
In the latest example, 60 Minutes, a pillar of American journalism, has been forced to repeatedly defend a report drawing bipartisan criticism. The report examines vaccine access for Florida seniors and the decision to let Publix grocery stores administer shots. A move, the reporter points out, came after Publix made a $100,000 political donation to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
The criticism is that it's pay to play, Governor.
It's wrong. It's a fake narrative. I just disabused you of the narrative, and you don't care about the facts because obviously I laid it out for you in a way that is irrefutable.
In extended remarks, DeSantis explained why Publix was used, but CBS didn't air it. 2 state officials, both Democrats, are defending the governor, including Emergency Management Director Jared Maskowitz. No one from the governor's office suggested Publix. It's just absolute malarkey, he tweeted. And Palm Beach County Mayor Dave Kerner, also a Democrat, issued a statement calling the story intentionally false, saying 60 Minutes should be ashamed.
Well, I mean, it was an obvious hit job.
Dan Gaynor with the Media Research Center says the media is trying to kneecap Governor DeSantis before he can announce his expected candidacy for president.
They cut out pretty much everything that went against their narrative.
60 Minutes defends its reporting. The controversy comes on the heels of little coverage of President Biden recently tripping 3 times while climbing the stairs to Air Force One, compared with this slow walk down a ramp taken by President Trump last year, which became a national story about his fitness for office. This all plays into the reality that nearly 60% of Americans believe media organizations are more concerned with supporting a political position than informing the public. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Objectivity out the window. Gordon?
Well, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the country. It's a tragedy for free speech. It's a tragedy for freedom of the press. But at the same time, it's nothing new in American history. Newspapers for a very long period of time have taken very active positions politically and have done either puff pieces or hit jobs. It's up to us as consumers of news to be aware of the bias in the news organizations that are talking to us. And this is quite clearly a hit job. I think that's been proven without need to go through the facts again. But why would you want to do that? And it's very obvious why you'd want to do that. You want to cut off somebody from higher office, and so you say, if I can kneecap them in the beginning stages, then they won't have a chance in a primary and they won't have a chance in a general election. This has been going on for some time. We've now started to call it fake news, but it's actually a news with a particular opinion driving it. And that opinion and that ideology is starting to trump the facts. The good news is we still have a free press. And so in that free press, we get to point it out. This is fake news. This is opinion. This is an opinion piece. The facts that are presented are quite clearly biased.